So King Louis XIV moves the royal court to Versailles, in that's just outside of Paris. He feels like he needs a proper setting for an absolute monarch, because he thinks he's the Sun King. The interior of the building has axes that all meet at his bedroom. Done under the umbrella of the Royal Academy of Arts. The Royal Academy of Arts is a strong academy in Paris, one that if you're going to be a successful artist, you really have to attend. And so he works in conjunction with the Royal Academy of Arts to employ several artists. The artists that he employ are the very first interior designer, the very first landscape designer, or I'm sorry, I misspoke, the very first landscape designer. The idea behind the landscape is that he wants to have nature as something that he can control. Right now, they are at the brink of the Industrial Revolution, and so nature is something that if he can figure out how to control nature, the technology of the world has already figured out controlled urbanization. And so controlled nature becomes a goal for him. The controlled nature comes through fountains and through the landscape architecture. He basically builds a whole new capital. In the 1600s, that was 2 million people that lived there at Versailles, and in surrounding areas serving King Louis. The building itself is 1/3 of a mile long, and the entire grounds are visible from space. Louis Laveau and Jules Hardon-Massat are the architects that designed the Palace of Versailles. Louis XIV basically builds a satellite city, and all the nobility have to move there. They move there to serve him. I mentioned to you that the palace had about 2 million people that were there serving King Louis. And I mentioned to you that King Louis tried very hard to control the nature that the grounds were on. What you're looking at here is a view from the garden reflecting pools onto the facade of the palace. André Lenotre was the first landscape designer in history. He designed the entire setting for the building. The cruciform is a reflecting pool, and they had an allegorical program to the design, meaning there was conceptual ideas that went into the design. The bigger point, though, is that this is a true Baroque building in that the facade undulates in and out with the viewer's space. It might be a little bit hard to see because what you're looking at is a picture of it, but if you look across the span of the front of the building, you see that parts of the facade pop out and are more raised than other parts of the facade. That's what makes this a true Baroque building. Because of that jetting out into the viewer's space, the viewer feels like the building becomes part of their space. The facade, the Renaissance time, was very static. It was very flat. And so the fact that the Baroque are pushing that and making it so that the facade comes out towards the viewer gives the viewer a relationship with the facade. What you're looking at here is an example of the palace fountains. The fountains dot the entire property, and they have a lot of allegorical meaning. If you look closely at the picture on the left, you can see the different sculptural figures that make up that allegorical meaning. There's a reflecting pond that has a fountain in the middle of it. It's Apollo and his chariot. And what you're looking at right here is the horses in the chariot. The fountains are situated in a way that when the sun rises in the east and it sets in the west, the fountains are on a program that display water based on the rising and setting of the sun. So not only does Jules Hardin Masson design the exterior of the building, he also designs the complete interior. You can see the interior Hall of Mirrors here. The Hall of Mirrors was an important part of the ritual that Louis XIV carried out every single day. Every single day, the palace servants or the people who were living in the palace that were hired to serve King Louis XIV would make a ritual out of dressing him. They would dress him for the sole purpose of him promenading from one end of the Hall of Mirrors to the other. So he would start at the east entrance and promenade to the west end of the hall. Right now, the way you see it, the candelabras and things have been electrified, but back in the day, they would have been lit by candlelight. The Hall of Mirrors has an entire row of windows on the left side, and on the sun is reflected from the mirror. So the hall is this brilliant display of light that comes through. And Louis XIV, like I said, would promenade from one end of the hall to the other. Getting dressed was a ritual, and promenading from one end to the other and of the hall. He would then get to the other end, and then he would have an entire ritual of de-dressing and going to bed, getting up the next day and starting it all over again. This room is truly a magnificent room. It is truly a Baroque room. It has lots and lots of detail. You can see the crown molding at the ceiling. You can see how the room has a sense of sculptural feel to it, even though the sculptural feel projects from the walls. Same with the facade of the building. You get that sculptural feel because the facade jets out into your space. Even within the interior rooms, the decorations in the room jet out into the viewer's space. You get engaged columns, but these moving candelabras that you see in front of you also help that. The ceiling has a painting on it from one end to the other, and is painted in that illusionistic fresco style that we talked about when we talked about Bernini. You can see how the frames look as if they are set on top of the painting. Some of them are painted and some of them are true sculptural frames. The program of light that comes in and out of this room creates an incredible display of splendor each day. So this is the Queen's bedroom. She slept separate from King Louis, and it runs along the east-west axis. It has a room adjacent to it that intersects with King Louis XIV's bedchamber. So they each have their own bedchamber, but then they have a room in the middle that they both share. Because he thinks he's Apollo on Earth, as he rises, so does the nation of France. All the people wait for him to get up in the morning, just like we wait on the sun. The aristocracy was expected to follow him around. This was not a palace of pleasures. It was about organization, discipline, and duty to the state. Louis XIV grows the country, and there's a time of war. There are halls of peace and war within the palace, which are linked together by the Hall of Mirrors that we just looked at. So I wanted to tell you just a little bit more about the Hall of Mirrors in terms of the candelabras and things. Like I said in the last slide, there was a peace room and a war room at the that were linked together by the Hall of Mirrors. The crystal floor chandles that you see here were movable. You could move them around as you needed light, and they were originally made of silver. When Louis XIV promenades from one end of the hall to the other, the mirrors reflect the light, and in Louis XIV's eyes, they reflect the glory of the sun god, which is him. So the light, in his opinion, is the reflection of his glory. He did do a lot for France. He expanded the empire or the rule of France. But as time, and he puts in motion the Royal Academy of Arts, which is really, really strong when he leaves office. He was married to Marie Antoinette, and she was famous for the let them eat cake saying, because the palace was very grand and very expensive, and basically Louis XIV taxed the entire country of France to pay for the building of the palace. When he leaves office, Marie Antoinette is beheaded, and he is assassinated as well, and the whole country goes into revolution. But during the time that he rules, the aristocracy and the country, in terms of an army and all of that, is very strong. It's the people that live in the urban cities that are very challenged economically and weak economically, but obviously as a people they're very strong because they're able to overthrow the government.